Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So hello everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Jennifer Dunlap. I'm the Executive Director of Manada Conservancy, and we're your local land trust. Manada Conservancy has a mission of land preservation and environmental education. And the program tonight, Mysterious Creature of Penn's Woods, the Allegheny Woodrat, is a good example of our dual mission. The Conservancy works to permanently protect land, including the Kittatinny Ridge, that provides woodrat habitat, and also provide public education programs about the flora and fauna that make this region so special, to build an understanding of why local conservation efforts are so important. If you have a question for our speaker during the program this evening, you can just use the question and answer chat box at the bottom of your screen. And our speaker, Stauffer, will answer questions throughout the program and at the end of the program. Manada Conservancy's education programs are provided thanks to support from the Hershey Company, as well as support from our members like you, and thanks to the hard work of our volunteer education committee. I'm going to turn things over to a member of our education committee, Matt Weir, who will tell you a little bit more about our speaker for this evening.
Good evening. On behalf of the Manada Conservancy Education Committee, it is my privilege to introduce tonight's speaker, Stauffer, to you. Ara works with the non-game species management for the Pennsylvania Bureau of Forestry. She has worked as a consultant for the EPA and a local engineering firm, as well as a marine biologist instructor for the Audubon Society, and an inventory coordinator for the Nature Conservancy. She has been with the Bureau of Forestry since 2002. As a volunteer, she helped to ban saw-whet owls with the Project Owl Net. I have heard Ara speak on several occasions and spoken to her on the phone several times, and I can attest her passion for nature and wild places. If you mention the Michoud State Forest or the Adirondacks or the Tuscarora State Forest, the enthusiasm in her voice is evident. Without further ado, I present to you tonight's Manada speaker, Ara Stauffer.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I am going to share my screen. Hopefully you all can see that. And where's the icon? There it is. Sorry about that. I lost it for a minute. All right, well, I appreciate everyone coming online tonight. And I'd like to, as Matt said, talk about a pretty unique little creature called the Allegheny Woodrat. I'm sure some of you have heard about it. A lot of people that I work with, they think it doesn't exist because for a long time we would not have only their sign, but not pictures, but that's actually changed quite a bit. But first, just to show, yeah, I saw this online and I thought it was kind of funny. It's about wildlife biologists, and that's my profession, and I work with non-game species, but we do a lot of interesting things. I'm not going to complain, but this guy sitting at his desk, that's a lot of what I do these days, more so of that. I work for the Bureau of Forestry and the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. We have 20 state forest districts, if you weren't aware of that, because we do also have the Bureau of State Parks. So if you see all the green, the dark green blobs, that's state forest land. So I encourage you to go check out one that's closest to you. So what I'd like to talk about today is woodrat. What is a woodrat? Where do they live? How do we survey for them? And what about conservation? And I need to put the chat box up. So hold on a second, I'll do that just in case I'm getting any questions, but I might not be able to see them. I have a very small screen. So if something comes up, just yell. Okay. Hold on one second. It stopped advancing. There we go. So what is a woodrat? I kind of found this online from Craig Schaefer, and it's something it looks like I was published probably in a newspaper and based on information from the Game Commission. And I just thought it was kind of a neat illustration. But they are rock-dwelling native pack rats. They're very secretive, so they're pretty solitary and will defend their little territories. They have little activity centers. Usually they have pretty small home ranges, particularly this time of year, but they might go out during breeding season and go a little farther afield, but they don't tend to move a whole lot. And the males and females do not stay together except for during breeding. They usually live about 2 to 3 years, up to 5 years. They mate from mid-March to October. Gestation is 30 to 36 days. They can have up to 2 to 4 young per litter, and females can have 2 to 3 litters per year. So they're not reproducing a whole lot, but they do usually have at least a couple litters. They are nocturnal, and so at night, usually around sunset, shortly afterwards, they will start to come out from their little activity areas, and they'll forage. Especially during the summer months, they'll go a little further, looking for all kinds of food, leaves and nuts and berries and fungus and things like that. They do not hibernate, so as the summer goes on into fall, they do a lot of collecting things, and all these things that they forage for, they bring back to their activity center and they stuff it in the rock areas where they live, and so that when the winter comes, they don't really have as far to go to have a source of food. It's kind of like their refrigerator right there in their house. And they also are pack rats. Okay, did I have a question? Let me see here. How do they protect their territory? Okay, well, they are, they chat, they do some chattering and they make some noises, and they, I guess, push each other around. I've actually never seen them do it, but I know they're from reading the literature that they're rather solitary individuals. So I can't say I've seen a woodrat smack down, unfortunately. But they do not hibernate, and they will, like I said, stuff things in their rocks. I already said that. So down at the bottom, they're pack rats. They tend to collect things, and that's their nature that kind of gets them in trouble a little bit. So they could collect all kinds of things and bring them back to their little lairs. Now, some people, when they hear the word rat, it turns them off right away, and they automatically think of the Norway rat, which is introduced, came over from Europe. It is, in the genus Rattus. It is not a native animal. It had to North America. So if you look at one, it has a naked tail, and it's got more of a brownish pelage and kind of a blunt nose. And if you compare it to the native pack rat, which the native pack rat is in the genus Neotoma, the pack rat has more of a furry tail. It's kind of bicolored. They're nice, and they have a different color of their pelage, and they have like both rats can have a white underbelly, but wood rats also have a longer nose and lots of very long whiskers. They don't really occupy the same habitat, so if you're out in the middle of the woods and you see a rat on rocks, it's most likely a wood rat. They're also described by the Lewis and Clark's expedition in 1804. So wood rats were seen all the way back then, and this is from Clark's diary. They kept a log of everything they did, and so he said several rats of considerable size was caught in the woods today. So by Captain Lewis. And even there were even, you know, drawings here from Audubon of, this is probably the eastern woodrat. So historically, they were described a long time ago. So where do they live? Habitat use. Now here you see a bunch of rats, and they're in garbage and around urban areas. So these are the Norway rats that we all associate with development and so forth. And then Norway, or our wood rat, if you see these rocky habitats, forest, in the forest, there are the rock outcrops, there's talus slopes, sometimes little caves they'll use, or tunnels. You know, yes, this is wood rat habitat, but well, usually it is, because there's exceptions to every rule, and we'll discuss that. So typically they're not living in urban or with people, but sometimes in the past they have been. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So they're habitat specialists. So if you're driving down 81 or some of the areas and you're looking up on the ridges, you'll notice bare patches of rock way up on the ridge. And that's the type of habitat I'm talking about. It doesn't have to be completely open. It can be under canopy, but that's where wood rats live. And you'll see these little shelter caves that are all throughout these rock outcrops and talus areas that are formed, and they have all this underground network that we're not really familiar with. You know, we don't know how far back these underground habitats go, but there's lots of places for them to hide. And here's what I was talking about, the exception. There has been, you know, documentation where when there was a lot of wood rats. This book I recommend by Maurice and Irma Braun, curators of Hawk Mountain from 1934 to 1966. And there's actually a picture and a whole section about talking about a wood rat that they had in their basement. And she would come in and bring all kinds of things into her nest. So there are instances where they will actually use wood, you know, people's wood piles and things like that. And then that's when sometimes people aren't sure if they're, you know, a Norway rat or if they're a wood rat. This is their range of Pheotoma magister. You could see this is from NatureServe, so it shows you how secure some of the populations are. In Pennsylvania, they're S2 or imperiled at the moment. And so that's why we're seeing populations decline, and there's some concern here in Pennsylvania. This is the range of the eastern wood rat, which is different from our Allegheny wood rat, and they just separated them out not that long ago, really in the 90s, I believe. You'll see it's more of a southern species, just in comparison. And this is the historic range of the Allegheny wood rat. There were populations here that that we think no longer exist. For example, in the South Mountain, we don't have any there that we know of. The Delaware Water Gap, and up here in the northwest corner of the state, I'll show you the current. Well, this is a little dated map now, but you'll see that some of those populations are gone, and from surveys. So this is, you know, after surveys have been conducted. And so right at this moment, the Allegheny wood rat is listed as Pennsylvania threatened as a species of special concern. So why did they decline? One reason is probably from the decline of the American chestnut. As you know, there was a chestnut blight in the early 1900s, and chestnuts provided a steady source of hard mast. So hard mast would be things like the nuts that were produced, or in an oak tree, it'd be an acorn, or a hickory, there's a hickory nut. American chestnuts, unlike oak, produced mast pretty steadily and were a reliable source of food. So loss of that, plus another tree, the oak mortality due to gypsy moth, that was another source of food. Deer browse of desirable food sources as well. Makes an understory of hay-scented fern, which rats will will put in their middens and so forth, but they're not as nutritious as hard mast. Things like fragmentation and loss of habitat, connectivity and habitat degradation. Fragmentation especially can increase some of the predators that are out there, like raccoons and skunks and things like that, great horned owls. And then one of the ones that's pretty worrisome is a raccoon roundworm. And I'll explain that one. So raccoons that are infested with the roundworm, when they defecate, there could be, larvae or eggs in their droppings. And, the wood rats, being pack rats, will collect these things and take them back to their lairs. And then that's when they become infected. It's becoming quite a problem and causing mortality in some of our populations. So that's something that we don't have a real handle on, but we do know, we suspect that some areas are being winking out because of that reason. I think there's another question. Let me see if I can see it real quick. Reintroduction of fishers. Well, maybe that's a way to control our little raccoon friends, but there's some other ways too, and we'll talk about that. So surveying for wood rats. I work for the Bureau of Forestry, and we are not the regulatory agency. So I'm a wildlife biologist working in an agency that every species that I work with is regulated either by the Game Commission or the Fish and Boat Commission. So the Game Commission is the regulatory agency for mammals and birds in the state. So I have to work closely with their biologists and in any management goals that they may have. I try to support on state forest land. So when we survey and go out in the field in these large rock areas, we're looking for their food caches. And now this time of year is a very good time to do surveys because they are caching quite a lot. And you'll just see these dried bundles of different types of food and sometimes mushrooms and things like that. But they are dietary generalists. So this was a study that looked at a bunch of different food caches of wood rats. And these are the species that were found within those caches. So you can see it's quite a number of things. They'll basically collect whatever they can. But of course, some things have more nutritional value than others, and that helps them to survive through the winter. They have to have these things to help them survive and make it through the winter. And here's one at a site, Second Narrows in Tuscarora, where there's ferns that are drying. That's what it appears. They just kind of take the food and put it out on the rocks, but then eventually they will actually fold it and chew it in kind of these little, what we call accordion bundles, then little zigzags, and that'll be folded together and in their food cache. So it's kind of an interesting way that they stash their food. Here's another place. This is in Tidotton State Forest, and there's a lot of mushrooms that they just stuffed every crevice they possibly could with mushrooms, and there were a lot of ferns in here, unfortunately, because ferns are not particularly high in nutritional value, but that's what they had, and that's what they're stuffing in their little dens. So another sign is that we look for, besides the caches, are their droppings. They have sort of communal latrines, and these small droppings, they're not much more. I don't think I've seen any that are like an inch. They're less than an inch long, and also you'll see in there often there's some rounder droppings. Those tend to be millipede droppings that can also be there in the same area. But compared to, like, I've had very excited people tell me that they've seen wood rat droppings, and it turns out usually to be porcupine poo. And you can see the size of porcupine droppings compared to wood rats. And, you know, in a den of a porcupine, if you look behind here, you'll see there's a lot of it. So there tends to be quite a bit of it in a site where there's porcupines, and they can occupy the same habitat as woodrats. So woodrat nests, this is one, this is Greg Turner with the Game Commission, and this is one that we found in Quebec Run, I believe, in the Forbes. So I don't know, it looks like an awfully big nest. I think the eastern woodrat makes bigger nests than the Allegheny, but it's because this is down the southwest corner of the state. And I just wonder if it was a remnant nest left over from maybe at some point when their paths crossed, but who knows, maybe it is a giant Allegheny woodrat condo, but I've never seen one like that. The only one I've ever seen. Typically, you'll see a nest like in the rock crevice, you know, made up of different loose materials that they bring in, and it's much smaller. This nest here is, you know, not even a foot big, and it's just made on nice soft materials. So when you do surveys, sometimes it's good to sort of know what's new and what's old, because there can be sign there that's fairly old and may be an indication that the population or that activity center isn't active anymore. So so really we're looking at woodrat poop, and whether it's, you know, glistening, I guess, and wet, has more moisture content than the old stuff that's shown there. And the older it gets, of course, it breaks down more and more. It's harder to find the sign. Oops, I went the wrong way. Sorry about that. And as I was saying, woodrats are pack rats. They're collectors. So if we're in this little nest area activity center, and so you see there's a little hutch, or there's another one to the right. And then there's also a shotgun shell in there. There's some kind of wrapper in there, some kind of old masking tape. There's a twist tie. There's a cigarette pack. So they do collect all kinds of things and bring them back to their lairs. And that's why they have this pack rat. And this one was kind of funny. This was in the Sweet Root Natural Area in Buchanan State Forest. There's a cave up there, and there was a hunter who had a really nice pair of overalls, insulated overalls. He must have gotten hot and left them, and I never came back to get them. The wood rats came out at some point, found them, and shredded them, and took all the insulation and back from the pair of overalls and put them in their nest, and they made this really nice, comfy-looking nest in there, all out of this nice insulation. So they're very opportunistic critters. So you can do the surveying, like I said, for the sign, but it is difficult. It's challenging. This is a type of habitat. You know, your ankles and knees are not good at the end of the day when you're doing this type of work. But some areas are very expansive. You could easily miss signs. I did talk to a biologist in Maryland who has told me that, you know, he has not found sign in some areas, and then he's done some other type of survey like live trapping, and then been able to document wood rats at a site. So I think we may be overlooking some sites because we're just not finding sign. So live trapping is one way to do it. You can put out about 40 of these traps and bait them with things like peanut butter and apples and things like that, and you'll usually attract some wood rats. But, you know, this habitat, again, it's treacherous. I'm getting older. I don't really like to do that. Some of the younger folks don't seem to mind, the younger biologists and surveyors. And that is an active way of surveying. It's good. It's really necessary if you want to do kind of a mark recapture study, those types of studies. But if you're just doing presence absence, you don't really need to get out there. So I'm a little more lazy, I guess, and I like to use camera traps. But I'm not doing genetic studies and things like that. I'm just trying to do presence absence. And, you know, the technology keeps getting better and better, and the cameras keep getting cheaper and, you know, more affordable for people. It's probably, some of you may know that already. So we have bait that we use, just suet. So this bait container was devised by the Game Commission. It's just some PVC pipe and it has the lines on it so that when you put it in front of the camera, it gives you an idea of perspective as to how big the animal is that you're taking a photo of, which it can be important sometimes to helping you make a determination. So in this case, the camera's here, and then you see that the green cage is actually your average suet thing that you'd use for birds. And then, but there was a bar here placed for reference to help with, you know, measuring or trying to figure out how big the animal that you're taking a photo is when you're looking at all these things. So we say just add rats, put the cameras up, and you don't want to leave them up too long, but sometimes you know things happen and you can't get back to them. They tend to have a pretty long battery life, so they can be out there for quite some time before you get them. For me, there was a big learning curve. When you're taking photos of and things are near rocks, everything gets overexposed, everything's just washed out. So you have to actually take electrical tape and tape over some of the lights that are on these cameras so that things don't get washed out. And then porcupines are in the same type of habitat, so they do create some problems as well. They like to chew things, as we probably know. And I don't know if anyone is watching from the Game Commission tonight, but this is one of your cameras. I'm really sorry. They let me, I borrowed some from them, and porcupine unfortunately chewed this camera so badly that it no longer works. So one of the things that you really kind of have to do is, if you're out by yourself doing this and you're putting bait out, you really need to have some wet wipes to wipe down the camera, so maybe that it doesn't really smell or there's not a scent on it that the porcupines are attracted to. For me, and I had an issue with bears for a while, especially in one area of the Tuscarora. So I got these two bears, I called them the dynamic duo, and they caused all kinds of problems. And I swear the one bear moved the camera to get a photo of his friend in this nice profile, because my camera was not pointed in that direction when I left it. So the bears had to have moved it, and they just inadvertently got a photo. And then this one reminds me of my dog eating a treat. So this bear got the bait container and ripped off one end of it, and he's having himself a nice snack. And here's another profile, but this one has two, looks like ear tags on it. So that's usually a problem bear that was relocated. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was, but it might have been. And so I'm blaming the Game Commission for my bear problem. So here's some of the animal photos that I have gotten from trail cams, quite a number of different things. It's pretty interesting to see what you get. I can show you some of these photos, but we did not get any mountain lions, nor did we get Bigfoot. So sorry if you're looking for those. There was no luck for me anyway. Here's some bobcat photos that we got. Pretty blurry, but you can tell they're bobcat. Coyote. This little creature down here toward the bottom center is a red-backed vole. They're fairly common when they're in these rocky areas. And some funny photos. This looks like a bear selfie. Just kind of, it's funny how that photo took. And then down here in the corner is a squirrel. It looks like it's letting out a small scream. So it seemed to have been surprised. We do get a lot of photos of mice. So if you look here, you'll see the bait cage and there's a mouse on top of it. There's a lot of deer mice out there. So you go through a lot of deer mice photos, but eventually there's success. So I like this photo because it's in the same spot that the mouse was in. So you can see the size difference of the woodrat. So this is a woodrat. And if you go back and look, here's the mouse, a lot big, it's good to have that bait cage in there for reference so you can see the size of the animal. And obviously this is a bigger critter. It's got the long blunt nose, the furry tail. So it's no mistaking it that this is an Allegheny woodrat. And it's great to actually get some, and after all your hard work and putting cameras out, you continue to see them. And sometimes you see some odd things, like This one has a little stubby tail on it, and I got a couple photos at a couple different locations of the same individual on Fowler Hollow in Tuscarora. Okay, so those are survey methods. I'll move on to some of the conservation that's going on right now. Okay. So Jerry Hassinger is, some of you may know him because he's still very active, volunteer at the Ned Smith Center, retired from the Game Commission, a biologist from the Game Commission. And he just has said to us for years that the present conditions allow wood rats to survive but not thrive. And he's really talking about food sources that are available, like ferns and things like that. And so following, Jerry and his footsteps, our goal is to improve habitat by providing sources of food that will sustain and hopefully allow populations to thrive. We don't want to let Jerry down. So we're hoping to preserve wood rat populations. And what I'll talk about now is some of the habitat improvement work that we're doing, some other things that we're trying, and most of this is the Game Commission and control of raccoons, captive breeding programs that hopefully will start up again, and some translocation of individuals to other states. And we get hopefully some from their states as well. So one of the things we'd like to do is improve foraging habitat through management of vegetation. And it really doesn't take a ton of work to do this. It is, of course, on rugged terrain, and that makes it very difficult. And but we have in a lot of the areas that we've looked at, many sites are dominated by birch or red maple, and this is kind of, it has some wildlife value. I'm not going to say there's no wildlife value, but it's lower than, say, an oak tree or something like that. So once we see this, then we go into these sites and try to figure out what we can do. So you can, just create very small openings, about 1/4 of an acre in size, that can encourage some desirable vegetation to grow. So if it's an oak seedling and you open up the canopy a little bit, that seedling will grow. And you can get blueberries and huckleberries and other things like that. Our treatments also involve treating invasive species like stiltgrass, mile-a-minute, barberry, ailanthus, things like that. They're all problematic at these sites. Well, for the most part, they are. And another problem is when you create an opening, you're more likely to get more of these things, invasives popping up, as some of you may know already. And another option is to plant food sources in the openings, such as elderberry, serviceberry, oak, and hybrid chestnuts, which we have done at some sites. And I think that's really an important thing for the future. It needs to continue. So how do we select these sites? Some sites were selected after an IUP survey. So the Indiana University of Pennsylvania surveys, they looked at some genetics and looked at some sites that had been occupied in the past, and that was initially used. But then a lot of my colleagues at the Game Commission and myself, we like to use the trail cameras. So we've been going out and making sure that sites are still active. And this is a site that I have been working on for a couple of years in Fowler Hollow in Tuscarora on Rising Mountain. And so I started at a known location that was sort of up here in the northeast corner of this map. And I established that the wood rats are still there, and the habitat was all throughout this mountain. So I thought, well, I'll just keep putting cameras out until I don't see rats anymore. And I was very happy to see that at each of these sites I was getting wood rats. So I talked to the Game Commission, and they were able to help with some, so we identify the current activity centers, and then we would go out in the field with the game. I would go out with the Game Commission, Justin Vreeland and Clay Lutz and some other folks, and we determine what is needed there. And so Justin was able to get money to help us do these projects. So to actually contract it out to someone who would go and do the work for us. And he used Pittman-Robertson money, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, but it's from the Wildlife Recovery Act of the 1937 or something like that. And it's money that comes from an excise tax on firearms and things like archery bows and that sort of thing. It goes for habitat improvement. It's a federal source of money, and the Game Commission puts in for that. And so Justin has done a lot of work with the paperwork and getting that and making that come to fruition. Excuse me. So here's another example, visiting the field sites, that we've selected, going out, actually marking everything with paint, so making it clear that it's documented and what you need to do in each of these sites, mark the prescriptions, and make sure it's written out in the contract, that the contractor knows what to do. So here are some things that can be done, like creating grape arbors. So here the grape is growing up to the trees, and if you cut a couple of these little trees down and onto the ground, the grape arbors are down on the ground where the wood rats can reach it. And soft mast sources like shrubs such as blueberry and huckleberry. If you open up the canopy a little bit, you can encourage some of the growth and some of these, sort of creating these little mini food plots for wood rats. So here's another example of that. I think this is rubus, some kind of Allegheny blackberry or black raspberry, something like that. And also daylighting for oak seedlings, things of that nature, because they do need daylight or they're just going to stay in the understory and not really grow until the canopy opens up a little bit, and then you can encourage some of these oak trees to grow. And promoting other sources of forbs, other herbaceous vegetation that may come up as well, and hopefully help the wood rats in that way, just creating a lot of diversity. And as you can see from the one cache, they do like fungus. So if you have all these sources of woody debris down on the ground, hopefully, when that starts to rot, you'll get some fungus growing on that. So that's another food source for wood rats. So the treatments consisted, typically of tree felling, and it's small, mostly small trees. And so the companies that we would hire would take their chainsaws out and some brush saws and things like that. And that's usually what was needed to create these smaller openings. Sometimes the herbicide application, of course, would have to be applied. Difficulties, as you could see from some of the photos, these are very hard to access and navigate. Some of these treatment areas takes some getting to. The soil is poor around some of the rocky outcrops. If you want to plant something, survivorship may be low due to that. It's a constant struggle with invasive plant management, as I think some of you know, if you volunteer and you manage some land that the Conservancy owns. Invasive species, you can't just do one and done treatment for most of them. It's constant maintenance. And anything we plant can easily be browsed by deer, as they are pretty voracious in some areas. Another thing is you have all these populations or meta-populations in different parts of the state, and then those are the red areas, and then there's some of these inactive sites that are blue, and these sites tend to be isolated. So how do we connect them? And the Game Commission has been, thinking about how to do things like that. And so they were looking at actually creating rock piles, and I think they've done this in a couple areas already, because obviously here's a photo of one on one of their game lands, and animals that are dispersing or juveniles and things like that will use these areas of rock piles when they're going from one area to another. So is that a way to, they have to think about connectivity between populations and how to help that, hopefully better for the animals to get from one habitat to another. And then there's also a lot of fragmenting features like the pipelines and things like that. And so putting on if a rat, it has to go from one side to the other, it's kind of opening itself up to predation. So here, if you have a rock pile on top of the pipeline, that helps them, have some area to hide when they're foraging and going out and about in the evening. There's another view of that. And the gas company, I think this is Bower Mountain. I could be wrong because I got this photo from Justin, but that pipeline, the gas company was asked to do it, and they did do it as part of their mitigation. So as we talked about earlier, predator control is just something the Game Commission is starting to look into, and other states have as well. Some of it involves actually capturing the, putting out traps for raccoons in areas to help, reduce the spread of raccoon roundworm. They're also looking at baits, using a bait that will help, prevent the spread of through the feces of the raccoon. So there's a lot of things being tried in different studies, and so we're hoping that some of these will work, because this could be a major problem as to why some of the wood rat populations are declining. Captive breeding programs, long time ago, I know there was one where the Baltimore Zoo was actually helping do captive breeding, and this was probably in the 80s. But more recently, Reg Hoyt at Delaware Valley University, we actually captured some of our rats in the wild and attempted to do some captive breeding there. And I know he would probably be a good person. He could give a talk all on things that went wrong with that, because you would think they would easily breed in captivity, but they don't, and for various reasons. So that's something that if we improve upon, lessons learned and things like that, we may be able to at least have some captive breeding success. Translocation, well, this was actually a Butler knob, I remember this, and these rats were going to reg for, the captive breeding. But I wanted to show an example of translocation, which means we would catch a rat and give it to, we gave some to New Jersey, for example. And I think Greg Turner wants to also give some of our rats to Ohio, and we might get some from them. And it's bringing new genetics into these populations that are somewhat isolated. And hopefully that by having that, we've seen that some populations actually take off for a while when there's some new genes in the pool, so to speak. So do these treatments work? Well, we don't really know. And that's what we're going to have to continue monitoring. The treated versus untreated sites to see if the rats are doing better through live trapping and camera trapping. And that is actually going on. We've had some disappointments of one of our sites where it was a really good site with a lot of rats, and we did some treatment there, and for some reason then we weren't getting any rats at all. And we were really stumped by that and trying to figure out what happened. Was it the raccoon roundworm that's wiping this out? So we still have a lot to learn about this species and what helps them and what doesn't. But when it comes to wood rats, that they are a species that are kind of, a lot of people, when they hear the word rat, they don't really, can't warm up to this species, is what I'm trying to say. So I had an Aldo Leopold quote in my talk. I didn't know that you guys had one in what you were presenting at the beginning. So, but like winds and sunsets, wild things were taken for granted until progress began to do away with them. Now we face a question whether a still higher standard of living is worth its cost in things that natural, wild, and free. And that's, to me, that's why we should preserve this species. It's one of those things. It's wild. It's wild and free, and it's part of a complex ecosystem. that you remove different parts of it and we just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, this part here is already gone in the Northeast along with wolves and things of that nature. So that's why I just think when people say why, so replace the shrew with a wood rat, that's why I tell people that it's important to preserve this species. Even if you can't warm up to a rat, it does have a purpose. And with that, I'd like to thank my colleagues at the Game Commission, past and present, especially Justin, who helped me with some of these slides, and I'll take any questions. Thanks for listening.
I think we have one question there. I'm not sure if that was answered yet. Is the latrine behavior unique to this wood rat?
To this wood rat? Well, so that it's unique to, I don't know if any other species of rodents do it, but I know wood rats do it, and porcupines definitely have sort of a large latrine. So I just don't know of other species in Pennsylvania that do that besides those species. Yes, they do share habitat with the timber rattlesnake. So they do the rattlesnakes take wood rats? I heard that there's a paper, and I haven't read it, it's an older paper, but it supposedly says that wood rats are immune to rattlesnake venom. And unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to read that to see what the answer to that question was. But somebody just found it the other day. One of our Northeast partners found it. So I don't think a lot of rats are taken by timber rattlesnakes, but I'm sure there have probably been a few. Okay. Are there multiple types of wood rats? Yes, there are. And I am by no means a wood rat expert. I worked with a lot of different species, but as I was showing you, there's the eastern wood rat. And I would have to honestly look to see if there are other rats in North America besides those two. Because I really just stick with what's in Pennsylvania or nearby. So that's a good question. Okay.
You have a couple questions that are coming through the chat box there.
Okay. Let me see here.
So I can read them to you. One is, what do they do with the non-food items that they collect?
Nothing that I know of other than put them in their midden. I don't think they make any art or anything out of them. I mean, they're just keeping them. They just seem to have this instinct to bring things back and collect them. So other than something they did make use out of that insulation of the coveralls to make a nest, I don't think a lot of them just sit there in their caches.
And how many rats are in a large activity center? I guess, do they, how many gather together?
Well, a lot of times it's just the female and her offspring. And so they don't, typically have, the male doesn't stick around. So there's not that many. They really are not colonial type critters. They're very solitary.
Is there any evidence that climate change is changing their range?
I have not seen that. It's more at this point, some of the factors that I talked about in the study, that's the bigger problem. And they tend to be up on very dry habitats on mountains. If it's getting warmer, that might actually be better for them in some ways, because maybe there'll be a constant source of food in a longer growing period. But I haven't seen an association with that. climate change and woodrat decline. So, seems
Okay,
to,
I don't see any other questions coming through.
they're good questions. Some of them are, I'm going to have to myself look up how many rats are in North America. It's awful because I'm so focused on what I do here in Pennsylvania. All right. Anyone else? Hopefully you enjoyed the talk and learned something tonight. And I do appreciate your attention.
Yes, thank you so much, Aura, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. As always, we welcome your feedback, so please feel free to contact us. And to learn more about Manada Conservancy or become a member or find out about our future programs, please visit our website at www.manada.org. We wish you all a happy holiday season and we look forward to seeing you next year. Everyone have a good night.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.